T here, and I am back with Chapter 5 Hungry Ghosts from Paranormal Parasites, a book by Nick Redfern, and it's 162 pages. We are on again Chapter 5 Hungry Ghosts, and I'm going to get right into it with little uh, commentary from myself. Imagine waking up with a start in the early hours of the morning and being confronted by one of the most terrifying looking creatures that you could possibly imagine. A pale skinned humanoid monster with weathered arms and legs, a huge stomach, an oversized neck, and a mouth smaller than a dime. I have seen people like that. I know I said I wasn't going to comment again. Continue. It stares at you in a malevolent style as it leans in close. You suddenly develop a terrible feeling that the monster is seeking out your life force, your vital energies, and your very essence. A sudden weakness and helplessness overwhelms you as you seek to fight off the terrible thing that has suddenly invaded your space. In seconds, it's gone, sated and satisfied by the fact that it has just fed on you. Whether you realize it or not, what you have just encountered is an ancient supernatural entity known as a hungry ghost. The concept of the hungry ghost is not that well known in the West. That's because the phenomenon is very much one that has its origins in India and the Far East. It's tied to such issues as karma, how we choose to live on this physical plane, the consequences in the afterlife of having chosen the wrong path, and the form we must return in when we finally exit the physical plane. The hungry ghost phenomena is one that plays significant roles in the teachings of Sikhism, which came into existence in India in the latter years of the 1400s. The Sikhs, of which there are close to 30 million today, have their own sacred text, the Guru Granth Sahib. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. It teaches Sikhs to avoid what are known as the five thieves. They are character traits which are seen as wholly unacceptable within Sikhism. Those traits are anger, greed, lust, ego, and attachment. Should a person go against the traditional teachings, Sikhs believe there is a very strong likelihood that that same person, after death, will return to our plane of existence in the form of a hungry ghost. Buddhists are deeply familiar with the hungry ghost phenomena. Like Sikhism, Buddhism also originated in India. Around the 5th century CE, Jainism, which is also an India originated religion, maintains that reincarnation is a reality and that the hungry ghost phenomena is inextricably tied to it, as we shall soon see. China's Taoism also has a tradition of belief in these malevolent spirits, as do the followers of Hinduism. In other words, the hungry ghost concept is one known to various nations and cultures, and for a very long time, too. Karma and hungry ghosts. While all of the above religions have significant differences in terms of beliefs, the nature of the afterlife, and the specific definition of supernatural creator, they are all pretty much in sync when it comes to one particularly relevant issue, namely the idea that how one lives on earth will dictate how one will exist in the afterlife, the world to come. If you strive to live a good, honest life, the domain of the dead will embrace you in a positive fashion. If, however, you choose to live a lawless, evil, and hate filled life, the outcome for you after you move on from the physical plane will be very different. In a worst case scenario, you just might be cast back to the earth in the form of a hungry ghost. It is the destiny of the hungry ghost to have an afterlife filled with torment, frustration, and rage, and a need to feed on the living too. It's seldom that hungry ghosts are often seen. Chiefly, they are only appear when they voraciously crave food. For the most part, and for the rest of the time, they prefer to hide themselves away in the likes of caves, cellars, and old dark adobes. In fact, just about anywhere that is free from the light of day. As for what exactly the hungry ghost needs and desires from us, it is all very much dependent on the aforementioned issue of karma. But what is karma? Let's take a look. In a 2012 article, The Meaning of Karma and How You Can Break Its Grip, Senkuru, an Indian poet, author, and mystic, says karma literally means action. We are referring to past action. From the moment you were born till this moment, the kind of family, the kind of home, the kind of friends, the things that you did and did not do. All these things are influencing you. Even thought, emotion, and action comes only from past impressions that you have had within you. They decide who you are right now. The very way you think, feel, and understand life is just the way you have assimilated inputs. We call this karma. Karma is arguably just about the worst nightmare of the hungry ghost. If in your physical existence you were driven solely by greed, whether for money, riches, or power, you may find yourself returned as a hungry ghost whose greed revolves around food. Yet that infinitely tiny mouth, which is typical of the hungry ghost, prevents you from ingesting just about anything. Thus, you are in a state of never ending frustration and a need to feed, which is why this particular form of spirit is called the hungry ghost. It is, quite literally, in a constant state of starvation that it tries to alleviate by targeting us. If that doesn't sound like a narcissist cluster B personality, I don't know what does, because they are quite unsatiated. In some cases, a hungry ghost will resort to one of the most sinister ways of feeding. It will target a person with a particular vulnerable character, come on, weakness, insecurity, or a lack of self esteem are all angles that the hungry ghosts will seek out and exploit. I am just reading this to you guys, and I think it has taken me almost a month to get back to this part 4. And every chapter that I read to you guys or with you guys confirms what we have experienced with dealing with people who are cluster B personalities, which includes white, the narcissist, the borderline personality, histrionic, antisocial, psychopath, sociopath, and the couple others. But this is what we are all talking about. This is what we are all describing. So, again, just I don't want to take too much time, but I have said, Phoenix, is what I learned in my journey, going through in within the cocoon called the dark night of the soul for some, that I had to die. A caterpillar goes in and dies and resurrects as something totally different. It's in another class. That's what we have to become when Neo in the Matrix became willing to go into this world that he knew, but he didn't, because some of us don't really want to wake up, do we? I know, because I was there. I didn't really want to wake up. I was tired. And I have to admit, to be transparent for my clients, is that, sometimes you will go through that time where you're like, I think I want to go to sleep again. And that is what when it says in the Bible, the devil is lurking around to see who he can devour. It's because it's there. These are the cluster B personalities that are the hungry ghosts. These are those parasitic the parasites and the entities in the realms that we some of us can see into and some of us can't. But you know that when we feel all of a sudden that our energy is being zapped, etc., etc., etc. And I'll end with this. Hinduism, this is why I practice Hinduism. It does not interfere with my psalms or anything, my prayers. It doesn't interfere with that. It enhances. Because at one time, everything was together as a system of spiritual mind, body, soul, spirit, etc. It was all together. It was demonic entities that fragmented it so that we would be separate from each other and fighting like we're doing now, so they could it would make it easier for us to harvest. Okay, so but this is why I practice Hinduism, because there are mantras, and I will do a program um, on mantras that you guys could either go to my oh you can I'll provide it on Fiverr, but I'll also probably provide some videos for download at some point in time. Okay, here we go. So food for the ghosts. In some cases, a hungry ghost will resort to one of the most sinister ways of feeding. It will target a person with a particular vulnerable character. Weakness, insecurity, or a lack of self esteem are all angles that the hungry ghosts will seek out and exploit. They will then possess the victim. The ghost's reasoning behind this is quite understandable. If the starving spirit is itself unable to eat, it will invade and take control of both the mind and body of the person in its sights. In that sense, we are talking about something very similar to full blown demonic possession, in which the mind of the victim is paranormally elbowed out of the picture and becomes the tool of the supernatural monster. The monster will quickly feed, greedily so, on just about anything and everything it can get its claws into when in the body of its human host. Then, when the creature exits the soul and mind of the person it briefly inhabited, it takes with it the energy derived from the food that was ingested by the possessed host. The hungry ghost is then one of the most manipulative of all the many and varied paranormal parasites that haunt our world. Wow. It's not always quite so easy for the hungry ghost, though. The teachings of old state that some hungry ghosts will retain their ability to eat food and drink liquids, but that they will forever be thwarted from finding the nourishment they so deeply crave. For the hungry ghost who falls into this particular category, a cupboard will always be empty of food, a fridge will be bare, a stream will forever be dry, an oasis will be arid. Then there are those hungry ghosts which are still able to find food after death, but whose mouths are so small that they cannot intake even the tiniest morsel. Karma will sometimes place a hungry ghost into a situation where there is an abundance of food, but as the creature closes in and on the nourishing items, they always catch fire, quite out of the blue. On other occasions, the food is corrupted. The suddenly rotten, stinking items cannot be eaten at all. It's all about teaching the hungry ghost a lesson for the way it lived in its physical life. It's a lesson that never ends. A variation on all of this revolves around the hungry ghost of Japan. Its title is Gaki. The Gaki, too, is cursed with an unending need to feed, but it can only digest human waste. Ugh. A second Japanese hungry ghost is the Jikin Inki. Jikin Inki. It too is cursed. The only thing it can digest, physically at least, are the remains of the human dead. For that reason, Jikin Inkis are most all often reported seen in the graveyards and cemeteries, seeking out corpse both new and decaying. The Jikininkies don't care. The fact it is so difficult and sometimes even completely impossible for hungry ghosts to eat in the way we do explains why, for the most part, hungry ghosts will resort to inhabiting the minds of vulnerable people. It is through them that they can absorb the food based energy. The hungry ghost sometimes the hungry ghost does not stop there, though. Food, as well as we understand it, is not enough for them. They also secure a great deal of vitality from what is known as chi energy. Whew. Chi Machine International states in a 2017 article titled Chi, Universal Life Force Energy, the following: Chi is the energy of life itself, recognized as the balance of yin and yang, male and female, positive and negative electromagnetic energy, which flows through everything in creation. When chi becomes disturbed, stagnant, imbalanced, or depleted, disease and illness begin to take form. The aura becomes darker and discolored. Personal frequency vibrates incorrectly, and the meridians, energy pathways, Chinese origin, and chakras, energy centers, Indian origin, within the body become blocked. It is for this reason, the intense siphoning of chi energy by hungry ghosts, that so many people who have had the deep misfortune to encounter hungry ghosts find themselves constantly exhausted, generally unwell, and wide open to a whole variety of maladies. To say that people are being eaten alive and processed would not be far from the truth. And I'm going to stop here. We're going to continue reading, but I just want to make the comment that this is absolutely true. And I will tell you a few brief encounters that I've had. So, as many of you have known, during this my journey, I have shared about a few women, mainly two, that have been absolutely horrendous and savagely obsessed with me. And I have also shared that I had to, for survival purposes, fast into starvation in order to deal, because of the environment that I was in. It was so dark and so thick, so plastered, so covered and caked in witchcraft and conjuring from self proclaimed witches and warlocks. Some of them knew what they were doing, some of them didn't know what they were doing. Many of them would get involved with this gang stalking because they had lost their jobs. I know of one guy who lost his job, and then suddenly he's hiding behind, he was practicing actually when I caught him. And he was hiding behind the dumpster with shades on, acting like I couldn't see him and mumbling to himself, right? And then another time he made a comment, I live in two places. So he lived at the apartment complex where I first saw him, and he lived in another area, probably about 15, 20 minutes away. So basic, what I've learned, see, part of being an empath is that people, even the demon possessed, feel comfortable with laying their burdens down on your lap at your feet sometimes. And so I've said, let them hang themselves, just be quiet sometimes. So anyway, uh as this war I was fighting, while I was healing, while I was growing, while I was building Phoenix's Rising Academy, I had a lot of things that were being sabotaged because I couldn't understand why the trademark office in Washington, D.C. would all of a sudden block my trademark application, and I can't get into my account to save my life. Or the bank that I tried to do my business, I set up a business account for Phoenix's Rising Academy and my other Blue Phoenix Rising Media LLC. Set that up, and I kept getting rejected, kept getting, so everything that I tried to do over there kept getting rejected, kept getting rejected. But that was not satisfying. So this is not, sometimes I think because it's a cluster B cocktail, it's a cocktail of demons. And so what they're describing here, what Nick Redfern is describing in Paranormal Parasites, is what I'm talking about as a transformational coach and a narc coach. That these, and I've said it, so it's confirmation that these guys are actually demon possessed because they're feeding off of a womb. After we finish reading this chapter, I'm going to introduce you to another, but I'm going to post that on my TikTok. So go ahead and go over to my TikTok, and as I read that, because I think that should be a 10-minute article, and I'm just trying to get back into posting. But one thing is that this person, this this cluster B personality, turned into whatever kind of demon. I could feel her mutating, and I even saw that. I saw a big black mass when she thought that I was dating somebody, because in her mind, we were together. We were in this demonic spirit spouse type of relationship, right? Because these guys can't take no for an answer. But I've also felt her attached to me, and they'll attach to the right side of your brain, because the right side of your brain is the creativity. And this was in 2020, 21, I believe, after or before COVID, yeah, it was during COVID, and I was taking the trolley, and I literally, and this is what I'm saying, they will attack you because they have nothing but time on their hands, because many of them set themselves up to just have time, right? Just to have time, because you're astral projecting. But see, these people, I mean, when people talk about the 5D, demons are on the 5D, the 12D, you know what I mean? You get different ranking demons, right? And it's like, because this person, somebody on TikTok was saying, I realized that I could create duplicates. Basically, she could clone herself in the astral realm and create light bodies. And so I was like, oh my God, yes. Because this is so, I know that sometimes many of us as healers and spiritual teachers, when we're first going through this journey, it's like, I can't say that because people are going to tell me that I'm crazy. That's why I say everything that is going on with me. That's why I'm so transparent with you guys. Because I know that somebody out there is too afraid, and this person or these people could change somebody's life. And if I don't share, if I don't stay in my purpose and just tell the truth. And I've said this many a time. Sometimes you know who your soulmate is, but you never will be with them. Sometimes you know what your purpose is, but you may not get to that level, because the battle in the spiritual realm over your soul and your life and your bloodline is so intense now. You see what I'm saying? It's like, and I know, because I've often prayed and I've often, decreed, your free will not traumatize me and my family and bloodline. But when you get somebody who is nothing but a berserker, being a berserker demon means, like kind of like Fate Alive or whatever, when they have the berserker card, right? When you're dealing with a berserker, they're not thinking rational. They're thinking, I am going to have power, I'm going to have control, I'm going to get what I want, right? But this person turned into something so different, where she was so desperate because of my fasting, because of my praying, because of me chanting mantras, even though it got to be to the point where I was so sick of it that I got tired of doing it, but I had to, you know, and it was hurting my body, right? It was hurting my body to the point where now, I have digestive issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I was determined, come hell or high water, to break my family, my bloodline. And that's two bloodlines. You got to think, when your parents met, they met with different last names. Okay? And their parents met with different last names. So there's multiple bloodlines that are at stake here. And so I was willing to go through it whether I died or not. And there were times where I looked up at my spiritual self and was like, I guess this is it. Okay, so when you get coaching from me, know that you're going to get coaching and support from somebody who played no games with their own life and actually did what other people weren't willing to do in their own family to get through. So you're not going to be dealing with somebody who's a fake or a phony. But this particular uh, person had turned themselves into a berserker in the spiritual realm and was had created something. So I was watching her while I was going to work, and I was on the trolley, and I was watching her in the spiritual realm, and she's sitting there talking to me. And as she's doing literally surgery on my brain, on the right side, she's connecting, she's implanting something, and she's laughing, and she goes, "Oh yeah, 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 this is your." I mean, because basically I'm like, no, and so you know what I mean. So she taught me a lot about how far they're willing to go to break boundaries and spiritual laws, even though they're demonically chosen. You feel what I'm saying? So anyway, there's every once in a while, that she'll try and siphon and whatnot, and she gets real, and I can feel that demonic energy entity get really frustrated because they're being fought off. And I'll tell you what, even though I mean, like, I'm battered, I'm bruised, I'm 100 pounds, overweight, right? Again, you know, I mean, I can barely walk. My body is just, I mean, and it sucks because this is not the way that I was living. This isn't the way that I wanted to end up. And it sucks. And I was embarrassed for a time. Now I'm not. Now I'm not. I'm not embarrassed of my stomach, my big butt. I'm not embarrassed of any of that because I know what I spiritually went through, to save and protect myself and my bloodlines. So, anyway, hopefully that helps. So we'll get to this next subsection, the real horrors behind Halloween. As we have seen, the hungry ghost is predominantly an entity that has its origins in the religions and lore of India and Japan. It does, however, have a Western equivalent. The particular hungry ghost surfaces from its dark lair on what is, without a doubt, the spookiest night of the year. Huh. And what night would that be? Halloween, of course. For us in the 21st century, Halloween is just a bit of fun and excitement on October 31st. Kids dress up as zombies or ghosts, as ghouls, and as monsters. Costume parties are held. Pumpkins are bought in the millions. The words trick or treat echo around much of the planet, and a good time is had by one and all. Few people, though, have an understanding of why we celebrate Halloween in the fashion we do. You may be surprised to learn that the festival has the hungry ghost phenomena at its heart. Yes, really. The name Halloween is taken from a term coined way back in the 1500s that of All Hallows Eve. It is also linked to what is called All Saints' Day, which is celebrated on November 1st, just 24 hours after Halloween begins. Both Halloween and All Hallows Eve have much older origins than can be found in ancient Gaelic and pagan rites and rituals. They extend back to at least the 10th century. Collectively, those rites and rituals are known as uh, Samhain. I forgot how to pronounce it. Samhain is the way it's spelled, but I think it's Samhain. I forgot. Sorry, guys. Um, where am I at? Okay, it was on that night of Samhain. The ancients, sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, the ancients believed that the dead, or perhaps the undead, would walk the planet. They would come knocking on the doors of the people who so deeply fear the very things that would manifest in our realm on the night of October 31st. While some of the spectral visitors were friendly, others most definitely were not. As a result, Samhain was all about trying to appease the dead, to honor them, and to respect them, and not to incur their terrible wrath. While Samhain lore states that the dead were unable to physically eat food, those same spooks were invited to sit in on the immense banquets that were prepared for October 31st. If nothing else, The hope was that the spirits would see the invite as something positive and symbolic, and that the dead would not rise up against the living. This is why today kids all over the world ask that same universal question: trick or treat? It basically means, will you give me food or will you pay a terrible price? On the night of Samhain, if it was suspected that particularly hostile spirits were wandering the landscape, people would disguise themselves as the very monsters that they were so frightened of. In other words, it was an ingenious form of camouflage. This old tradition, too, has become inextricably incorporated into Halloween. It's precisely why kids are encouraged to dress as skeletons, zombies, and demons. Whether they know it or not, they are continuing a ritual that dates back centuries, which is designed to appease and hide from the hungry ghosts that would surface in Samhain. When Jack and the Devil clashed. Even Halloween's famous jack-o'-lantern has its origins in paranormal food and the world of the supernatural. In Ireland, there is an ancient tradition of legendary character called Stingy. Stingy Jack. Stingy Jack? Stingy Jack, a man who spent most of his life as drunk as a skunk. On one occasion, Jack got the best of none other than the devil himself. He manipulated the overlord of hell to climb an apple tree and get him a tasty apple to eat. Not realizing that there was cunning deceit at work, the devil saw no problem in doing that. While the devil was climbing the tree, however, Jack carved the sign of the cross into the trunk of the tree, which prevented the devil from coming down. Jack then demanded that the devil agree to never take his soul. The horned and fork-tailed one was outraged. Unfortunately, though, the devil had no choice. If Jack didn't obliterate the cross from the tree, the devil would be stuck up in the tree forever. Against all odds, Jack and had achieved something incredible. He had trumped the devil. When, as an old man, Jack finally died, he was denied entry to heaven because of his drunken ways. And the devil wanted nothing to do with him either. He had not forgotten that long gone day when Jack had bested him. At the time that Jack was face to face with the ruler of hell, he was eating a turnip. Filled with rage, the devil hurled a hot coal at Jack, which Jack caught just as he was about to return to our reality in the form of a ghost. Given that both heaven and hell were off limits to Jack, he decided to walk the landscape by night, seeking but never ever finding a final resting place on earth. And how did Jack negotiate the land by night? When the skies were dark, he placed the devil's glowing coal in the turnip and used it as a torch to illuminate his way. And that's why today we have the tradition of placing a candle or a light in a pumpkin. And of course, on the matter of parasites, we should not forget that Jack is part and parcel of the trick or treat phenomenon. The treat usually being a form of food. Clearly, even though the concept of the hungry ghost originated in India and Japan, the Gaels and the pagans knew even enough of the hungry ghost phenomena that it was seen as vitally important to provide the dead with food on October 31st, even if it was just in the form of a symbol of friendship or kinship rather than literal food. It's highly ironic that so many have heard of the hungry ghost phenomena and the ability of those same spirits to drain us of much needed energies. Yet on October 31st, millions of people bask in the old ways of Samhain without realizing its origins in paganism and the dead walking among us. That was very interesting. I really enjoyed that chapter. Okay, we're going to do one more chapter, guys. And this next chapter is chapter 6, called Bloodsuckers. There is one particular paranormal parasite that just about everyone has heard of, regardless of whether or not they have an interest in the subject. It's the vampire. For the most part, the image of the vampire has been dictated by popular culture such as movies, television shows, and novels. The vampire of the past was typically presented in the form of a middle-aged man dressed in a black suit and cloak. Today, though, Hollywood's vampires are far more likely to resemble a cross between Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson. Because the vampire is such an integral part of a horror fiction, has led to the assumption that blood-sucking monsters of the night don't exist outside of the imagination. This is, however, very much a variance with the facts. It's somewhat ironic that to understand why the vampire has taken on such an iconic stance, we have to first look at the world of entertainment. There is absolutely no doubt at all that the vampire as we know it today, at least, would not exist without one particular book. That title is Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was published in 1897. As we'll see, though, Stoker's classic Gothic novel was certainly not the first work to tell a fear-filled saga of the blood-sucking undead, but it was definitely the most visible and popular. The dawning of the vampire in fiction. It should be noted that Dracula was a definitive Johnny-come-lately. For example, in 1819, almost 80 years before Stoker's book surfaced, John William Polidori penned The Vampire, or Vampire, Pyre, a tale. For years, it was incorrectly attributed to George Gordon Byron, better known as Lord Byron, that's what I thought, an acclaimed poet and politician. His most famous piece of work was the epic poem Don Juan. Polidori was Byron's physician and close friend, and also penned The Fall of the Angels and On the Punishment of Death. The Vampire, a tale, was published in 1819 in the pages of the New Monthly magazine. The central character is a somewhat Dracula-like figure. He is one Lord Ruthven, a dangerous and deadly character. Indeed, just about anyone and everyone who crosses his path is destined for tragedy. As Polidori's story reveals, Lord Ruthven is a definitive drainer and drinker of blood, a precursor to the famous saga of Count Dracula. Definitely. Such as the success of the story and the fascination with Lord Ruthven that were other writers of the day continued where Polidori finished and wrote their own stories concerning the evil lord. They included Cyprian Bernard's 1820 novel Lord Ruthven ou les Vampires. Then, in 1847, Varney the Vampire, or The Feast of Blood, caught the attention of the people of the UK when it appeared in a penny dreadful publication, written by Thomas Pickett Prest and James Malcolm Rymer. The saga of vampiric Sir Francis Varney became a huge success, further cementing the image of blood-swilling monsters in then modern-day England. Carmelia, published in 1871-72 and written by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, is a highly atmospheric novella which sees the female vampiric Carmelia of the title attracted to and obsessed with Laura, the protagonist of Sheridan Le Fanu's tale, which emphasizes the sexual and erotic aspects of vampirism. Okay, sorry. But no one can deny that it was Bram Stoker's Dracula that really got the ball rolling in terms of making the vampire known both far and wide. While Dracula is certainly seen as the #1 vampire-themed novel, it's unfortunate that those titles that came before it have largely been forgotten by most people, apart from firm devotees of the genre. Without Bram Stoker's Gothic masterpiece, there would not have been Universal's 1931 movie by the same name, which starred Bela Lugosi, nor would there have been such sequels as Dracula's Daughter and Son of Dracula? And had Universal's movies not been, have been such phenomenal successes, it's all but certain that Christopher Lee would not have been given the chance to make the role of his own numerous movies from Hammer Film Productions, including Scars of Dracula, Taste the Blood of Dracula, The Satanic Rites of Dracula, and Dracula AD 1972. Would we have had Salem's Lot, Interview with a Vampire, Twilight, True Blood, The Strain? Almost certainly not. The phenomenal and combined success of all the above movies, TV shows, and novels has exposed the vampire to millions of people over the course of a couple of centuries. These same productions have achieved something else too, a widespread assumption that vampires are only fictional in nature, which, as incredible as it may sound, is far from the case. That's right. Those blood sucking monsters that you were told didn't really exist really do. And they have for millennia. We just call them cluster bees now. Let me stretch it. Sorry about that. The term, oh, vampires, the real and ancient kind. So I'm going to break here for a minute. And so I'm going to teach you real quick. I wanted to do this before I started this chapter, but I forgot. And let me get back to it since it's bugging me. So, those of us, just real quick, we'll get back to it. But just a side note, because we're talking about vampires. And once cluster B personalities get into your energy and they feed off of you, they cannot help but continuously feed. And so they become, as I've just mentioned with an example of how a woman became so obsessed with feeding off of my energy and trying to live vicariously through me, and by, literally trying to possess my body or implant something, whether in her witchy, whatever kind of ritual or whatever she had done to try and literally steal my identity from the spiritual realm using witchcraft, that they they still don't um, they still don't get it, so they become so obsessed and they still don't get it. So as the writer explained, said that the hungry ghost originates from India and Japan. So here is a Hindu mantra that, and there's a lot of them. Hanuman, uh, and Shivaji, though Hanuman and Shiva, big, and Kali, huge, and her many forms. Basically, there's different forms that they take to different personalities, different modes that they take. So here's one. It's called the Bagalamukhi mantra, and the Bagalamukhi mantra. I have said it once before, and I'm saying it again because there is somebody in my energy and they get off on it, and I've told them not to come in, and they keep sneaking in because again they're entitled or whatever, delusional. When we were dealing with cluster Bs, it's hard dealing with cluster B face to face in the physical realm, let alone doing it from the spiritual realm when they can't get you in the physical realm, right? So I'm going to chant this mantra 9 times. And again, it's the Bagalamukhi mantra. And this mantra repels anything. And so this mantra goes both ways. If you have something evil that you want to do to somebody, then it's going to cut you down, right? It's going to stop you because that's what she does. Okay, she doesn't care who's doing what. Just stop it. Is basically what she's about. She's about getting us out of our ego, right? There's another mantra that I believe that I think that may have been the one that I spoke that helps you to get out of your ego and destroy negative parts, whether they're the negative parasites that are attached to you or whether they're the negative thoughts, which the parasites thoughts, thoughts can become parasites if they're lower vibration and weighing you down, even if it's the thoughts of others. So this is why we have to constantly clear our own ori, our prana. We have to clear that. We have to make sure that that aura, that shield around us, that light body, that energy, right, doesn't get so small and so dull that it evaporates and ceases to exist because we are caked in layered uh, toxicity. So here I go. Om Hrim Hrim Bagalamukhi Sarvadoshtanam Vacham Mukambadam Samvaya Jivam Kilaya Buddhim Vinashaya Hring Om Swaha Om Hrim Bagalamukhi Sarvadashtanam Vacham Mukambadam Samvaya Jivam Kilaya Buddhim Vinashaya Hring Om Swaha Om Hrim Bagalamukhi Sarvadashtanam Vacham Mukambadam Samvaya Jivam Kilaya Buddhim Vinashaya Hring Om Swaha. All right, I'm only going to do it 3 times. 9, sorry about that, guys. 9 is normally the base number, holy number. Okay, it's I'll explain it in another video, or if you want to see, just Google 9, the number 9, or 108 uh, spiritual value Hinduism. Okay, so I just wanted to do that because I hate that when somebody comes in, and I can always feel them come in. They attach to my root chakra. If you've ever listened to David Icke, go to his read his books, because he actually has diagrams that where he's illustrating how these demonic entities or reptilians, draconians, whatever you want to call them, archons, whatever you want to call them. I don't know the difference. That's not my bag, but all I know is I have a succubus that is a reptile, and that's going to be the next book that we read. That keeps attaching her and attaches herself through my root, right? Because it's a bonding. You know what I mean? Nobody is supposed to be there but my guides and my higher self. Actually, my higher self is the only one that's connected, right? And my guides. So anyway, thank you for bearing with me. But look up Bagalamukhi mantra to ward off or defeat evil people's intentions against you. And so when somebody comes in, they're breaking and entering into your empire. If you have not given them permission, there is no relationship, there's no loved one, there's no spiritual responsibility that I have to any of these people. And see, there you go. There's no spirit, because this person has been in my energy. I don't smoke marijuana. This person is a heavy marijuana smoker and a heavy drug dealer, drug user and the like. And I've woke up before with my mouth parched and my throat sore and the smell of a sour weed, you know. I grew up with weed. My dad used to smoke weed, so I know what good weed smells like and what pee-pee weed smells like, as I call it, pee-pee weed. And being in California, people tell me that that's from Tijuana, so, you know, guess that's the cheaper stuff. Anyway, let's get back to it. Sorry, you guys. Thank you so much. But go look that up in Google, Bagalamukhi mantra, to ward off people's evil intentions towards you. And the evil intention can be simply, I'm going to connect to your energy and I'm going to spy on you in the astral realm without your permission. Even though I know that you have closed all doors, I am going to sneak in through the cracks in some way, shape, or form. Okay. So here we go again. Vampires, the real and ancient kind. The term vampire was not used in the English language until the 1700s, when it appeared in the pages of Travels of Three English Gentlemen in 1746. Nevertheless, tales of marauding, deadly blood drainers in human form can be traced back to the dawning of history and civilization. Lilith, quite possibly the most dangerous bedroom invader of all, was said to not just have sex with men as a means to steal their sperm, but also to take their blood. Joseph McBay noted that Lilith, like Lilu and Lilitu of ancient Babylonian, caused the victims of their attacks to fall sick with anemia, a sure and certain sign that blood was extracted from those same victims to a dangerous degree. The people of India believed in the dreaded ghostly band of creatures called Vatala. Although they were spirit based in nature, they also had the ability to drain the blood of the living of blood. They were also known for bleeding fresh corpse dry. Would lurk in the shadows of old cemeteries and graveyards, patiently waiting for darkness to blanket the landscape, at which point they would dig deep and fast into the ground, seeking out the most precious commodity of all, blood. Impusa was very much a Lilith type entity who tormented the people of Greece thousands of years ago. Just like Lilith, Impusa, a beautiful woman with a disturbing craving for blood, would creep up on the unwary in the dead of night and drain them of blood. Whereas blood and sperm were all that Lilith needed, Impusa would also devour the flesh of her victims. The early Greeks also feared Lamia, a female blood drinker who was the secret lover of Zeus, the Greek god of thunder, and fed on the blood and flesh of children. The ghostly Gello of Greek lore also spent most of her time seeking out the young to extract their blood, specifically to make it hers. A blood drinking fog monster. Moving on to Scandinavia, circa 1,100 years ago, we have tales of a violent and incredibly powerful monster of human like proportions known as the Draugr. Its alternate title, the Optrug, Opt, Opterganger, Opteganger, both roughly translated as one who walks after death. They're both, so the first one is spelled Draugr, Draugr. Second title is spelled Aptrgangr. Okay? Both roughly translate as one who walks after death. It would be best described as a vampire with zombie like overtones, since this particular vampire wasn't just partial to human blood. It was it also had a taste for human flesh. Scandinavian lore maintained that to ensure that the dead never rose up and attacked the living, all human bodies should be buried in horizontal fashion. If a corpse was interred even slightly angled, there was a very good chance that it would return as a dangerous drogger. Even failing to pay the newly dead the respect they deserved might cause a man, woman, or child to come back as a drogger, and come back quickly too. The creatures were not just ferocious drainers of blood and eaters of flesh, though. They also had a fascination with gold, silver, and millennia old treasures, which they would obsessively hoard. They also possessed supernatural abilities, including the power to turn themselves into a thick fog in that ethereal form, which prevented them from being killed. After all, it's impossible to plunge a wooden stake into fog. As a result, putting an end to a drogger was an arduous and highly dangerous task. Returning from the grave. Certainly, one of the most notorious of all the vampires was Jur Grando. He was a resident of Kringa in what today is Croatia. The term vampire was still unused at the time, but the local folk had their very own title for the blood-sucking monsters, of the area. They called them the Strigoi, Stigoi, Strigoi, which was also the term used in a popular show, The Strain, which was broadcast on the FX channel from 2014 to 2017. I remember that. I couldn't watch that. Grando lived all his life in the area and passed away in his late 70s. He wasn't ready to give up on his life, however. He came back a dangerous vampire with a wild craving for blood. Interestingly, How whereas most vampires are said to return in undead form within days of their original passing, with Grando, about a decade and a half passed before he reappeared on the scene. He quickly instilled fear in the people of Kringa. To begin with, Grando caused absolute hysteria for many people by staring malevolently through the windows of homes of the village folk and scaring them out of their wits. This included Grando's widow. Rumors flew around the area that whenever Grando knocked on someone's door, they would soon be snared by the Grim Reaper. The local priest, Father Giorgio, was finally able to confront the vampiric Grando with a cross, which clearly had an effect on the deadly thing, to the extent that he fled away at a phenomenally high speed. The day after the confrontation between Father Giorgio and Grando proved to be the latter's final day, or final night rather, on earth. He, having learned that each and every morning before sunrise Grando returned to his grave, the locals chose to take care of things when he was at his most vulnerable, sleeping in his wooden box. The coffin was hauled out of the ground and carefully opened. All were shocked and horrified by the sight of him before them. There was Grando, sporting an evil look, maniacal grin, but fully asleep. Father Giorgio said prayers while one of the townsfolk, Stipan Milasic, sliced Grando's head clean off his shoulders. Grando awoke screaming as the blade cut into him, but it was too late. The vampire's life force was already ebbing away. Finally, the good folks of Kringa were safe from the terrible Strigoi. Terror in Mexico. All right, Panteon de Belén is the name of a cemetery which can be found in Guadalajara, Mexico. Just like so many cemeteries all around the world, it has a deeply sinister vibe surrounding it, one that still persists today, almost 170 years after it was built. Most of the residents of the cemetery do what they are supposed to do, namely stay at rest. However, however, did not, according to stories that surfaced during filming a sci fi channel show in the latter part of the 19th century. One particularly restless character roamed the cemetery, which led to horror and even death. Matters began when the blood drained body of a woman was found late at on night on nearby Nardo Street. Her body was discovered in an alley off the street, which nothing less than a savage wound to the neck, specifically to the jugular vein. Days later, yet another body was found, this time on the fringes of the cemetery itself. This one, however, had been dug up from the grave in which it had been buried just days later. The dangerous monsters that was responsible had dug deep into the grave and wrenched the lid off the coffin. Yet again, there was the classic calling card of a vampire: two bites to the neck, one or two bites of the neck. Over the following week, several children were killed, all in the same fashion. Clearly, something had to be done, and quickly it was. Within 48 hours of that week long journey of savagery, or period of savagery, there was yet another death, this one of a young girl whose body was found discarded in the cemetery. The violent mode of attack was as it was has always been for a vampire. The fact that most of the attacks either occurred in the Pantelin de Belén cemetery or around it led the townsfolk to conclude that the best approach was to keep a stealthy and watchful eye on the place. It worked. In the early hours of one morning, the creature was yet again prowling around the graves, seeking out fresh corpse. Even a gang of men suddenly appeared out of the shadows and surrounded the snarling, staring at abomination. It took more than a few men to force the beast to the ground, and as it violently fought and struggled to make its escape, one of the group hammered a wooden stake into its heart. The undead was now dead. Period. Determined to ensure that the vampire of Guadalajara would never again kill or cause mayhem, The people of the area quickly buried the remains of the fiend in a deep grave. Then, for good measure, they covered the body with layer upon layer of concrete, with the stake still in its heart. In situations like this, it's far better to be safe than sorry. The story is still not quite over, though. It was only around 6 or 7 weeks later, when the concrete slab started to fracture. It was not, however, due to the blood-sucking creature finding a way out. Rather, it was caused by a large nearby tree, the huge and thick roots of which were pushing against the concrete and making it look as if the vampire was the cause. This aspect of the saga has led to the development of a story that in the area still exists today. Local lore tells of a tree in the cemetery that bleeds when its bark is cut into. What kind of blood? Human blood. Okay, and I'll read these two, and then we'll call it a day. On the loose in London. In relatively modern times, there are few stories quite as strange and sinister as that which concerned a fearful monster called Highgate Vampire, on account of the name of Old London Cemetery, where the creature lurked, slaughtered, and of course drank. It was in the 1960s that Highgate Cemetery found itself inhabited by a most welcome visitor, a 7 to 8 foot tall monster with bright red eyes, an evil looking and gaunt face, and pale skin, who wore a flowing black cloak. Amid the old graves, a dangerous parasite roamed by night. As the Highgate Cemetery it was opened in 1834, it located is 1839, excuse me, is located in North London and is composed of the East Cemetery and West Cemetery. It's a huge and undeniably atmospheric place that extends close to 40 acres in size. Catacombs abound, as do moss covered, crooked gravestones. The dead are everywhere. The cemetery is also dominated by huge trees, endless bushes, and a massive variety of plants, not to mention a large fox population, owls, and birds of prey. In fact, so revered are Highgate Cemetery's wooded areas that it has officially been listed as a historical park and garden by the British government. It's not at all surprising that when the sun has set, when the land is shadowy, and when the daylight is gone, the cemetery takes on an eerie air. The hoot of an owl, the creaking of the branches of an old tree, and the sight of many battered gravestones all combine to send chills up and down spines of more than a few who know the legend of the resident vampire. And in decidedly synchronistic fashion, Hammer Films Productions' 1970s movie Taste the Blood of Dracula was partly filmed in Highgate Cemetery. All right, so the next chapter or subchapter that I'll read in chapter 6 uh, will be When Fact and Fiction Cross. But I hope that you guys have enjoyed this. This is going to be, let me see how many more pages. Yeah, because these guys he could talk about Dracula all day. One, two, three, four, five. Maybe I'll do one more. Never mind. Let's get to it. Let's keep going. It's only three. I know, and I got to take my babes out. But let's continue. When fact and fiction cross, cemeteries are creepy places at the best of times. In the 1960s, however, the atmosphere at Highgate became distinctly chilled, maybe even freezing. Skulls and even partial human skeletons were found strewn around Highgate Cemetery, which at the time was very much overgrown, largely because the entire place had been left to fall into rack and ruin, something that only amplified the air of misery and fear that dominated the area. It should be noted, though, that long before the events of the 1960s began, there was already a vampire tradition at Highgate Cemetery. The story has a connection to none other than the man who brought Count Dracula to life, Bram Stoker. It's most intriguing to note that in Dracula, Stoker Stoker made mention of the old cemetery being the final resting place of one of the deadly Count's followers. It's possible that Stoker was inspired by an all too real set of eerie circumstances that occurred in the 1900s or 1800s. In 1855, a woman named Elizabeth Siddall was buried in the cemetery. She didn't stay that she didn't stay there for too long, though. In 1862, her grave was opened up. The reason we're told is that the family wanted to recover a number of poems that Siddall had written that were interred with her. To the horror of everyone present, after 7 years spent 6 feet under, Siddall looked exactly as she did in life. Her corpse had not decayed, and her red hair looked freshly washed and dried. The implication was that Siddall was one of the undead, a vampire. Brother. On this point, in a 2013 blog post titled Elizabeth Siddall, the First Vampire of Highgate, Redmond McWilliams wrote, some notable literary scholars have theorized that the fictional character of Lucy Sternra, one of Count Dracula's disciples, was largely based on Elizabeth Siddall, the late wife and muse of pre-Raphaelite painter Dante Gabriele Rossetti. It's almost certainly not a coincidence that Bram Stoker chose to feature the old cemetery in his classic novel. Supernatural 60s. In the 1960s, tales began to surface of a fiery-eyed vampire on the loose in London's Highgate Cemetery. There were stories of people going missing, of graves allegedly desecrated, and of bodies vanished under mysterious circumstances. The creature was also seen roaming around at night in the old Swains Lane area, its grim and cruel visage sending people into states of unbridled terror. One of the most significant cases took place in late 1969. The story was both strange and creepy. The witness in question was talking, taking a walk through the cemetery when she suddenly became disoriented, which was strange, as she knew the area very well. She also felt weak and sick, which is something we have seen time and again in relation to numerous confrontations with paranormal parasites. Huh, I felt that. Suddenly, a black garbed, red eyed terror loomed into view, hovering several feet off the ground. The man did his utmost to flee the area, but it was all in vain. The creature got closer as the man got progressively weaker, which, with hindsight, led the man to believe the monster was draining him of his life, of his vital energies. The publicity surrounding the alarming incident prompted others to come forward who had also seen the vampire of Highgate Cemetery. One witness, while walking her dog through the thick and unkept trees late one night, encountered a shrieking banshee like thing that sailed through the air, then suddenly dematerialized. Another person who saw the monster at close quarters was David Ferret, a paranormal investigator who decided to check out the cemetery for himself. It was a case of be very careful of what you wish for. With midnight less than an hour away and on the haunted Swains Lane, Ferrant suddenly developed a sense of something deeply malevolent in his midst. He strained his eyes, staring intently into the darkness of the cemetery, and realized that there was nothing staring back at him. Was it merely a trick of the light? No, unfortunately it was not. Ferrand had barely gotten 15 feet into the cemetery when he saw, to his horror, a tall figure in black. Like several of the earlier witnesses to the vampire, Ferrand felt his self-will leaving him, and rapidly too. Luckily for Ferrand, the entity suddenly vanished, leaving him frazzled and traumatized. The media, the monster, the latter-day reports. As a new decade dawned, the 1970s, Highgate Cemetery's resident vampire was still causing terror and mayhem. Numerous people contacted the local Hampstead and Highgate Express newspaper to share their encounters with the thing. One of those people are Daughtry, Docherty, Docherty, was whose story was published in the paper stated, "There is without a doubt a ghost. Of when and whom he originated, I don't know. Many tales are told, however, about a tall man in a hat who was across Swain Lane and just appears through a wall in the cemetery. Local superstition also has it that the bells in the old disused chapel toll whenever he walks. The above quote can be found in Neil Arnold's 2010 book Paranormal London. We'll hear more about Arnold shortly. Realizing that tales of monsters and spooky places sell newspapers, the staff of Hampstead and Highgate Express ran an article in 1970 titled, "Does a Vampire Walk in Highgate?" Vampire being an old German type of vampire. Okay. The interest in and intrigue surrounding Highgate Cemetery's resident monster was increasing rapidly. The newspaper quoted the words of Manchester of the British Occult Society. Manchester said that he believed the vampire originated in Turkey and that its followers eventually brought him to England in a coffin at the beginning of the 18th century and bought a house for him in the West End of London. The ongoing publicity the ongoing publicity prompted a young woman to come forward with her own account of an encounter with the creature as she walked past the old cemetery late one night. The pale-faced thing threw her to the ground and vanished in the darkness. Things got even more bizarre when two young men, James White and Simon Wiles, were arrested by the police. The pair was seen prowling around the cemetery and brandishing nothing less than wooden stakes and crucifix. The police took an extremely dim view of the attempts of the two to slaughter the vampire, but no charges were brought. Certainly, it's doubtful that killing a vampire could even be considered a crime. By 1971, the sights and the accounts of people feeling drained by the monster came to a mysterious halt. That is, until decades later, specifically 2006. Neil Arnold is someone who has extensively investigated the many and varied paranormal mysteries of the UK's capital city. Notably, he has uncovered post 1970 sightings of the Highgate vampire. In his book, in his 2010 book Paranormal London, Arnold stated that on one particular night in the summer of 2006, a man walking down Swain's Lane saw a dark figure standing near the gates of the West Cemetery. Upon approaching, the man noticed that the figure was dressed in a long dark coat and had a tall black hat perched on its head. The figure in black said, "Good evening, sir," to the somewhat disturbed man. The disturbed feeling was quickly replaced by sheer terror when the figure rose off the ground, floated across the road, and vanished into the shadows of the cemetery. Then, 1 year later, a glowing eyed figure in black was also seen on Swain's Lane, and it walked through a solid brick wall. Perhaps one day the energy draining vampire of Highgate Cemetery will return once again, causing terror and mayhem, just as it did back in the 1960s and early 70s. Mocha's monstrous vampire. When it comes to the issue of paranormal activity on the island of Puerto Rico, there's no doubt that the legend Chupacabra leads the pack. 20 years before the Chupacabra surfaced, however, there was another monster roaming the island. It became known as the Mocha vampire on account of the municipality in which the creature lurked and hunted. The mystery and controversy began in early 1975. Witnesses described seeing a large winged monster swoop down on farm animals, killing them instantly and drinking their blood. Imagine something that was part petrodactyl, part giant bird, and part mothman, and that will give you an idea of the nature of the beast, which fed on not only small animals like chickens and geese, but even on cows and pigs. It always emitted an ear splitting shriek as it dive bombed the unfortunate animals and killed them with one swipe of its sharp claws. For 2 terrifying weeks, the Mocha vampire had the people of the area living in fear, and no one can blame them for that. Then, mysteriously, the monster was gone and attacks were over. The creature was never seen again, unless, of course, you subscribe to the theory that the chupacabra and the Mocha vampire are actually one and the same, but with different names, which is admittedly not impossible. As we have seen, the vampire, which many people assume to be a fictional entity, largely created by Stoker and portrayed in masterful fashion by Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee, is an all too real monster. It's a blood draining, diabolical thing that has been with us for millennia and shows no signs of going anywhere away anytime soon. Remember that should you ever decide to take a trip to Puerto Rico. And remember to take a couple stakes and crosses with you, too. All right, so chapter 7 is Mind Monsters. And so give me a couple days and we'll read that. So I hope you guys are enjoying this. Please don't forget to ring the bell, like, subscribe, and share. If you guys are interested in any services or signing up for programs to get on your healing journey, or you just need an empathic listener, go to the link in the profile and sign up, and I will uh, see what we can do. Okay? Remember, Phoenixes, your blessings are in your ashes. Rise.